Having spent such a long time playing video games and keeping an eye on the industry through magazines and the internet in such a way as I have in the last 12 years, I really get a kick out of finding games that I had no idea even existed. It's twice as awesome when it's a shoot-'em-up. Released in 2000 for the Game Boy Color, Project S-11 is just such a game. Flying solo under the radar, nobody I knew had heard of it either. So after finding it at a small booth at the local weekend market, I decided to check out what I had evidently missed. Western-developed shooters have a very different feel than their Japanese counterparts. Often, shmups from the West lack the finesse and polish that the ones from Japan offer. Project S-11 is no exception, but developer Paragon 5 has made a very good effort to maintain a decent amount of playability. The first thing you're going to notice about playing Project S-11 is the control. There are movement physics at play with this game, so if you move in a certain direction, you won't stop moving when you release a D-pad. Your ship will coast a bit. With this in mind, a player would constantly have to take into account the fact that when you move in another direction, it will not be immediate due to these physics. It definitely makes things quite a bit more challenging as a result. Thankfully, you're not only given a life bar that depletes when you collide with enemy ships and shots, but also a life stock. Your life bar will also replenish over time, and after defeating the mid-boss of the stage that you're in, you can also pick up 1-up icons to increase your life stock. There's also a wealth of different weapons available to you as well. A weapon power-up will cycle through 5 different armaments. As you'll see, I prefer the flamethrower. Additionally, as you pick up more weapon icons, your weapon will gain more power, indicated by a gauge in the right-hand info panel. You also have access to a powerful bomb attack, but unlike most shooters, its damage is localized only to its blast radius, and it won't clear enemy bullets. As such, it's only most effective against a screen full of enemies or end bosses. Now, as far as the gameplay itself goes, Project S-11 is pretty run-of-the-mill. It's strictly a point A to point B shooter, with your primary objective being the destruction of an alien attacker known as the Cephe. In fact, your score can only ever be 4 digits long in this game, so scoring seems to have been the last thing on the developer's mind. There's also no co-op with this game either, as is the case with most Game Boy shooters. This makes it a fairly short game with not too much in the line of replay value. However, there is a final score at the end of the game after the credits. Being that Project S-11 isn't too challenging of a game, it's fairly easy to set a high score for the time that you'll spend in its 8 4-minute average stages. How long you spend with it basically depends on how competitive you want to be with yourself. In terms of presentation, Project S-11 succeeds with bright, colorful visuals which are never weighted down by stutters, flicker, or slowdown. Everything moves at a nice, smooth pace, even with many enemy sprites and shots on screen. The only thing that I can complain about is the lack of animation on the on-screen sprites, but this might have spurred performance issues, so it's not such a bad thing. The player's ship could have used a couple of extra animation frames while turning, though. The sound suffers a bit with some poorly sampled audio, but when you consider that the Game Boy Color only has a fairly rudimentary 8-bit sound engine, hearing crazy techno beats come out of the Game Boy speaker is actually pretty cool. In fact, I would say that the sound would sound better from the Game Boy speaker rather than how you're hearing the music through the better speakers on a computer, for example. Poor sampling can also be overlooked when the tunage presented is as catchy as it is. I found myself grooving to the soundtrack as I played this game, and that's always a good thing. There is just one thing that really bothers me about this game's presentation, and that's the ending. It's extremely anticlimactic. But that's not so bad when the game is as fun to play as it is. So with interesting physics, decent gameplay, and a strong presentation, just how does Project S-11 stack up? Let's take a look. With 8 stages, each with their own mid-boss, and running about 4 minutes each, Project S-11 should score higher, but with shallow scoring and an anticlimactic end, it suffers. Though it's not too hard, you will find yourself hitting a lot of enemy shots and ships thanks to the slippery control. It does take quite a bit of getting used to. The replenishing life bar compensates for drifting movement. Bright colors and well-presented graphics give Project S-11 a fairly high visual score. Animation is still needed for at least the player's ship though. Good sound effects complement a catchy 8-bit techno soundtrack, but is marred by poor sampling. And finally, Project S-11 gets a fairly high ingenuity score for implementing a more real-feeling ship movement, even if it is a bit flawed, and progressive weapon system. Though places that actually have Project S-11 reviews don't think too highly of it, it still comes off as a fun experience that stands apart from most everything else on the Game Boy Color. At anywhere from $5 to $15 at auction, you still get your money's worth. Project S-11, despite its flaws, is recommended, especially for collectors.